Microsoft. Steve Ballmer took over Microsoft in 2000 when Bill Gates stepped down. On paper, perfect choice. In reality, it was like handing a Ferrari to someone who only ever drove a tractor. In 2007, Apple announced the iPhone. The entire tech world stopped breathing. You know what Ballmer did? He laughed. Literally sat in an interview and laughed at it, called it too expensive, and said it had no future. Meanwhile, the iPhone became the most profitable product in human history. But that wasn't even the worst part. Ballmer introduced something called stack ranking inside Microsoft. Every year, every team was forced to fire their lowest-ranked employee. Didn't matter how good your team was, someone had to go. So engineers stopped collaborating and started sabotaging each other instead. He also canceled the Microsoft Courier, a foldable tablet prototype that existed years before Samsung made billions from the same idea. Microsoft stock went from $58 to $37 in 13 years. The moment he left, Satya Nadella took over and Microsoft became the most valuable company on earth again. Hector Ruiz. In the early 2000s, AMD was actually winning. Their Athlon 64 processors were beating Intel in performance. Gamers loved them. Builders trusted them. Then Hector Ruiz made his move. In 2006, AMD bought graphics card company ATI for $5.4 billion. On paper, smart idea. In reality, AMD couldn't afford it. The debt crushed them. R&D budgets got slashed. Engineers left. Development slowed down. Intel saw the opening and launched the Core 2 Duo. AMD had nothing to compete with it. They went from winning the CPU war to scrambling for survival almost overnight. Ruiz also spun off AMD's manufacturing into a separate company called Global Foundries, meant to save money. Instead, it created supply chain chaos and left AMD dependent on an outside partner for their own chips. By the time Ruiz left in 2008, AMD's stock had dropped over 60%. Lisa Su took over years later, rebuilt everything from scratch, and gave us Ryzen. The rest is history. Carly Fiorina, HP, in the late 90s was one of the most respected names in tech. Printers, servers, workstations, rock-solid reputation. Then Carly Fiorina decided HP needed to be bigger. In 2002, she forced through a $25 billion merger with Compaq. The board fought it, shareholders fought it, even HP's founders' family voted against it. She pushed it through anyway. The merger was a disaster. Two massive companies with completely different cultures, product lines, and workflows got smashed together. Thousands of employees were laid off, followed by internal chaos. Suddenly, product quality dropped and took customer trust with it. HP's stock fell nearly 50% during her tenure. The board finally had enough and fired her in 2005. She didn't even see it coming. The Compaq merger is now studied in business schools as a textbook example of how not to do an acquisition. Spent $25 billion, destroyed a legacy, got fired anyway. At least she got a $21 million severance package on the way out. Kevin Rollins. In the early 2000s, Dell was untouchable. Cheap, reliable PCs built to order. Everyone from students to enterprises was buying Dell. Kevin Rollins became CEO in 2004. His strategy was simple: cut costs everywhere. But he did that too much. Dell started using cheaper capacitors in their motherboards and desktops to save money. Those capacitors were faulty. They swelled, leaked, and died, taking entire systems down with them. Millions of machines were affected. This became part of the wider capacitor plague crisis that hit the industry in the early 2000s. But unlike other manufacturers who scrambled to fix the problem publicly, Dell tried to hide it. Internal emails later revealed that Dell knew about the faulty capacitors and said nothing to customers. Support complaints exploded, reliability reputation collapsed, and customers switched to HP, Lenovo, and others and never came back. Rollins was forced out in 2007. Dell spent years trying to rebuild the trust that cost-cutting destroyed. BlackBerry. Mike Lazaridis and Jim Balsillie were BlackBerry's founders and co-CEOs. In 2007, they held 20% of the U.S. smartphone market. Businesses loved BlackBerry and governments used it, but then the iPhone launched. Lazaridis called it a normal phone. Balsillie dismissed the App Store model entirely. Both of them genuinely believed keyboards and email were all people needed from a smartphone. They were wrong. While Apple and Android built ecosystems, BlackBerry stood still. No touchscreen strategy, no App Store investment, no real response for years. By the time they admitted the threat was real, it was already too late. Market share collapsed from 20% to under 5% in just a few years. Two founders running the same company, both looking at the future and refusing to see it. They stepped down in 2012. The company never recovered under anyone, Marissa Mayer. Yahoo in 2012 was struggling but still relevant. 800 million users, real traffic, real potential. Marissa Mayer came in from Google with a $900 salary package and a lot of confidence. She spent $1.1 billion acquiring Tumblr in 2013, promised to not screw it up. 4 years later, Yahoo sold Tumblr for just $3 million. She made 53 acquisitions in total, and almost none of them worked. The worst part? Microsoft offered to buy Yahoo for $44.6 billion in 2008, before Mayer joined. Yahoo rejected it. By the time Verizon bought Yahoo's core business in 2017, the price was $4.5 billion, a fraction of what was on the table. Mayer collected nearly $260 million in total compensation during her tenure. Yahoo's value collapsed around her the entire time. 53 acquisitions, 0 real wins, left with $250 million anyway. Elizabeth Holmes founded Theranos in 2003 with one claim. A single drop of blood could run over 200 medical tests, faster, cheaper, more accessible than traditional labs. Investors loved it, and the company raised over $900 million. Holmes was on magazine covers called The Next Steve Jobs. But the technology never worked. Theranos was running most tests on standard third-party machines while telling everyone their proprietary device was doing it. Patients received false medical results. Some were told they might have HIV or cancer incorrectly. When journalist John Kerry Rowe started investigating, Holmes tried to shut it down. It didn't work. The whole thing collapsed in 2015. Holmes was convicted of fraud in 2022 and sentenced to over 11 years in prison. Stephen Elop. In 2010, Nokia was still a giant. They had the phones, the users, the brand. What they didn't have was the right CEO. Stephen Elop came in from Microsoft, and almost immediately he did something nobody expected. He abandoned Nokia's own operating systems, Symbian and MeeGo, and went all in on Windows Phone instead. He literally sent an internal memo calling Nokia a burning platform, telling his own employees their products were doomed. That memo leaked publicly, and overnight every Nokia user started questioning whether they should jump ship. They did. Developers stopped building apps for Nokia, customers stopped buying. Sales collapsed in real time while the switch to Windows Phone was still being prepared. By 2014, Nokia's entire mobile division was sold to Microsoft for $7.2 billion, a company that once held 40% of the global mobile market gone. Many people still debate whether Elop was just incompetent or was deliberately sent in by Microsoft to take Nokia down from the inside.